thank you for being here the entire day, and finally, this is the panel that I have, and I'm so fortunate to have some legal experts discussing how to navigate the intricate maze of regulations and compliance requirements, which are actually changing by the month, even fortnightly, sometimes in some cases. But of course, they know the way to deal with it, and that's the discussion we'll have. And I want to straightway go to my first panelist. Let me come to you, Baminee, start with you. There's so much, during the course of the day, we saw some overlapping topics, related to what we are discussing, and we also discuss it outside. Give me a sense of how do you prioritize compliance efforts when regulations are constantly evolving and sometimes even conflicting. Can you give me a sense, a perspective from your industry standpoint?
Let me start. In fact, in one of the earlier panel, a gentleman actually quoted a poetry, but let me quote a poet, an American poet called Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, who actually said, it takes less time to do things right than to explain why you did it wrong, right?
Wonderful.
So compliance is a given, right? Yes, it's a scenario, it's just not only in India, across the globe, regulations evolve. We have to prioritize compliance. So one is, of course, to be proactive, right? How do you be proactive? One is, of course, working with your operations team who know what the business is about. Second is, of course, working with your public policy and your government affairs team. And of course, reaching out to the experts. So you are ready for the evolving regulatory landscape. So you know what's coming your way and you plan for it. Once it hits you, you're already planned and you know what needs to be done. So you go ahead, implement it. Of course, one of the things that I heard many of the other panels talking about was on awareness and training. Conduct awareness and training, and then of course ensure compliance. One of the things that I've seen, the conflicting part, yes, it's a challenge, but what we've seen is working with industry forums, going to the regulators, explaining, getting clarifications help. The other is also benchmarking yourself with other players in the industry really helps to come together and take a position on it.
On the other side of this panel, if you have to share, your approach of, how do you kind of look at compliance regulations, when they are evolving and changing, how do you look at them and set them in a context that really helps your company? Yeah.
I think, the fact is that compliance and regulations are something that you have to adhere to. So I don't think you have a choice on saying that do I or do I not and how do I. The fact is you have to. And no matter what, every regulation, every industry, and especially, kind of the new tech startup as well as the new industries, these are still evolving. But the fact remains that while it is there, you got to do it on the go. So it is a mandatory thing you must do. And whatever it is, it will keep evolving, which gets me to the point that ultimately, if you are doing the right thing, you'll be in compliance with the regulation. The fact that if you're doing what is right, even when the regulation changes, it will be very easy for you to maneuver and change it to do exactly what they want by a tweak, because you're still doing the right thing. So clearly from a evolving perspective, and so every evolving industry and evolving regulation will continuously change. So you got to keep up with it. And my colleague just turned around and said that you just got to be proactive. But at the same time, not only proactive, you also have to be very intuitive to say, okay, what is it that can come tomorrow and what are the risks that are there out there that people see my business as, So in that situation, what are the kind of things that I could tomorrow be asked to do? Let me give you a very classic example, right? For example, in the gaming industry, we've been asking for regulations now for more than 4 years, right? So this is not, there was no regulations, it was all out there, open, there was nothing to do. We've been asking why, because we realized at some stage, the industry is such where there will be double side of the perception. Somebody will take it right, somebody will kind of start to treat it differently. Therefore, at some stage, you got to be answerable. And you got to be answerable in writing and how the world can see it. Therefore, you ask for regulations, you start to put your processes and compliances together such that tomorrow when the regulations come, you're anyway complying.
I thought of giving a little different perspective also here. So yes, we all are speaking of compliant and we need to be compliant. That's a mandatory requirement. But let me also ask this question and position it that, do we get the right kind of support from our stakeholders? I come from a manufacturing company and we run a very important kind of a tool also where we check on the various compliances, the responsibilities with the stakeholders. And on a very regular basis, what we see that people are actually not doing what they're expected to do. It could be as simple as filing certain returns. It could be as simple as just updating the requirements. But a lot of times, unless there's a push, people think that it's not important. And there we play a very big role. And it's very, very important that we bring in the right kind of perspective of what we call a stone from the top. And the messaging goes out very, very clearly to the entire organization that there's no excuse on this. There's something which is to be done. Now, this could be from a perspective of ensuring that we are not complying, not meeting with any kind of a non-compliance to avoid any kind of penalties, but also bringing a kind of a culture in the entire organization wherein our external stakeholders, which could be customers at large, which could be media at large, we are being seen as a company which believes in a lot of compliance.
Let me get the initial comment on the same question from Ajay, and then I'll come to Maushami.
Like for a company like us, so we are a company.
If you could keep it closer to you, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So for a company like us,
Still.
there are two parts of the compliances. One is the regulatory compliance, what the regulator in India talks about. And for another part of compliances, because we are a company, if you name top 10 global OEMs, I think 7 will be my customers. So if you see the kind of the contracting that OEMs are doing with us, it talks about a lot of compliances, be your human rights, be your data privacy, anti-bribery. So for me, this is not the regulatory compulsion, but also like something that my customer require. And those are the customers who are doing the periodic audit also. They're giving the reports. So the options are very limited for us because if I need to be in the business, I have to comply with the law. Another part of this I would like to add, like we are a company where there's a lot of focus on the corporate governance part. Like very recently we got the corporate governance award also. Like for the CS Institute also we were among the finalists. And very recently this IIS, they carried out the assessment of our governance practices. And among the top 200 BSc and NSE companies, we were ranked 33. So for us, the mandate is very clear from our board. You adopt best of the practices. You make sure that you comply whatever is applicable. And in fact, you should go beyond compliance. So if you see my website, many of the policies that regulation doesn't talk about, that is published on our website. So I think this is very much important for us.
Right. Okay, Maushami, final comment from you on this first question.
Yeah. Thanks, Ruhail, and thanks to BusinessWorld for having me here. So I think most of the panelists have already covered all the points, and I also second whatever they have said. Being in an entertainment industry, our business is not a very regulated business because the act which we depend upon is, 1952. It dates back to 1952. Though there have been amendment, it has not yet been implemented. So we face challenges. We take proactive steps. As Sameer also said, that sometimes it is important for us to let the bodies, the regulators know that yes, we need to be regulated, and they are things which we want from the regulator. So that is our approach, and that has always been our approach. So what we do is there are 4 E's that we follow, and it's like because we are entertainment, so therefore E's are very important for us. And these are, we educate ourselves, we educate everyone about the changes that is happening in the regulatory world and which impacts us. Nothing can happen in silo, therefore education is not just sufficient. We evaluate and examine how these regulatory changes would have impact on the business of the company. So once we do that, then we engage with all the stakeholders, internal, external, regulatory stakeholders through our internal representation, and there is a body which represents the multiplex industry, which is called MAI. It's been formed under the aegis of FICCI. So we take the problems to them, and then we sort of try to see where we are hit and how we can sort of solve these problems. And once we do these work, then we evaluate, after evaluation, we properly put systems in place to combat all these issues. So that's what we do, and then finally policies are framed, or regulatory policies, basis the regulatory policies, internal policies are framed. We also identify the stakeholders, because it's very important that we identify who are going to take responsibility for seeing that the policies are implemented properly. So there is operations, there are F&B, there is IT. So each department has to be told about their role, and there the GC plays a very important role. Educating the other stakeholders and the external stakeholders is very important, and that's what we do. So this is how we sort of keep pace with the constant changing compliance regulatory regime.
Thanks. I know it must be very challenging that there's a regulation but never implemented, and you have to go back to a dated kind of regulation. Okay, let's understand this further, maybe with examples from your respective experiences, one by one, and starting with you, Baminee, that any particular example where you faced a challenging regulatory issue in your company or your career, and how did you resolve it?
In fact, I think Maushami and myself were discussing about it. Each one of us, I'm sure, would have faced multiple regulatory issues. So it's sort of like something that we do come across. For me, more than the challenge that we face, or giving you an example, and I'm sure the others will share specific example, I would say there are areas of clear black and white, which is very clear to handle it, but there are areas of gray. And I think that's where the role of the GC comes in. Because you're sitting at the leadership table, advising the management on what needs to be done. There could be areas, there was a panel before this where we said we have to do what is right. So when we are doing what is right and balancing the risk with what is meant to be done, I think becomes a very critical role for the GCs to adhere to. Work with the business, working with the management team, and ensuring that we balance this out becomes a critical role of the GC.
I think, let me, two things. One, of course, kind of having worked in the telecom sector for a long time, we realize that telecom is highly, highly regulated. I don't think there is any other sector which is as regulated as telecom. Given the fact that the act dates back 150 years, and the fact that the regulations date back so long, and it was always a kind of the license Raj forever. It still is, by the way. But I think one big challenging thing in the telecom world, and I think they're still trying to sort that out now, is that if you go back into the telecom world history regulations, there is an act, but the regulations, there is no actual regulation that is there. These are by way of notification and circulars that the TRA and the DOT actually issue. So till about just 2.5, 3 years back, when I was still in the telecom world, I had about 17 files in my office, which were regulations or these notifications that kept coming. And at last count was 1700 something. So you had to put all of that together, and anything you had to go back and start to see how it transpired, and therefore why are you here. So if you had to challenge something in the court, you had to go back and check the history. And actually the regulations, also the notifications that came and never came out saying ki all of this is out, this is what you got to follow. This is what you follow in addition to what was stated earlier, which meant that you have to follow everything and say, okay, this, and oh, I missed something. Yeah. So I think that's one place where I saw a huge challenge. And if you have a situation like that, as a company, it's a disaster, right? You're just trying to always catch up. And then when the regulator is even tougher, he's always trying to say, I found that you didn't do this. Come on, now answer me. So that's one area that I thought. So the second is in the current situation, is that here is a situation the industry is saying, please regulate us. Okay? there is no regulation that came out. Finally, the IT rules got amended. They put in the regulation, but this was on 6th of April 2023. We are sitting in May 24. It has not moved. They have not even come into force. Now, at a situation where you work with the regulators, you work with the government to say, okay, we need the following regulations. You kind of come up with regulations which are tough, but the right thing to do, and it's not implemented. So you are a semi-regulated industry today in a way. You know the regulations coming to hit you, and you're required to comply with it, which we are happy to do. But at the same time, it's not there, and you're still waiting in limbo for it. And so that's one big issue that today we are kind of talking to the government, and of course with the elections coming in, nothing's really happening. But is that, how do you get this implemented quicker? Because implementation or getting it implemented is probably 80% done. Complying with it is probably the easiest part. Yeah.
Thanks to AI now, I mean, if you were in the telecom sector now, I think it would have been simpler, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure they are looking at, and now with the new entire Digital Act and all of that, where they're planning to put in the telecom bit as well, I think it'll get simplified. But I mean, better late than never, but yeah, I think could have been done much earlier.
I'll pick up the example from the manufacturing industry. And I think people from the manufacturing, they'll all agree with me. One of the most complex things are the labor laws. I'll take an example from a previous company, and I was given the mandate that the company wanted to exit from one of the plants by selling it off. And we had the mandate to close the plant. Looking at the current law, I informed my teams in the region as well as the HQ in Detroit and Singapore. I said, see, you will not get the approvals. This requires a prior approval. And I was questioned quite a lot, where I was told that if, as a company, I can invest in India, why can't I exit? That was the time we had a lot of struggle, went across the government offices, met with them on regular basis, filed application, on expected lines, it was all rejected. Moved on, yes, I mean, at the change of policy now, the government definitely is looking to bring in many more changes to the labor laws. It is coming as a kind of a balance between the employer and the employee. But having said that, when do we expect that to be implemented? It has been in the draft stage, state to state, for the last couple of years. We have been preparing ourselves to comply with such laws, but when do we see the light of the day? I think that's still an open question.
My issue, like the one regulatory issue that we face, it is a very small, it's a petty issue, and it is coming from the labor laws, okay? So now you know the SEBI is so much proactive, like every day you will see one or the other changes. Very recently, they revised the threshold for the materiality threshold. So like one of the notification that is required, if any fine or penalty has been levied on you, irrespective of the threshold, that need to be communicated to the stock exchange. So we have a robust compliance system. We collect the compliance certificate. It is being placed before the audit committee, and then we communicate them if there is any non-compliance. But so far, there was no non-compliance. One day it happened that in one of the compliance certificate, my HR manager told me that, Ajay ji, look, this happened to me, that one fine of 3,000 rupees was levied by some labor inspector. That guy came, and in fact, only the security guy asked the identity card, and that guy was so furious. Then he said, look, this notice or this particular act is not displayed on your notice board. And then he ended up in paying the fine, the penalty of 3,000 rupees, two fine in fact, 3,000 rupees and 9,000 rupees. But because it was part of the compliance certificate and placed before the audit committee, so our secretarial auditor, they are also conducting the quarterly audit. So they picked up from the minutes. And then we had to report that matter. Now it is a public domain, so I'm free to talk about this. So the fine of the 3,000 rupees and 9,000 rupees, that was levied maybe 5 or 6 months back. But we had to report to the stock exchange. Since 2000, we got listed in 2021. I think this was the first non-compliance that we had to deal with.
Examples to share from this?
Yeah, actually, our issues are just doesn't stem from the regulatory issues. It stems from the customer expectation also, because being the biggest and the largest multiplex player, the expectation of the customer is higher, and we have to meet the expectation of the customer. That goes without saying. So for example, the act, as I said, is a very old act.
Sorry, the microphone has to be closer.
Yeah. So the Cinematograph Act, as I said, is a very old act. So there was a requirement of maintaining projectionist in all the cinemas. So this regulation dates back to the period when analog was the trend, and reels had to be maintained. But now, because of the digitization, there is no need for any projectionist per se. So we had to literally convince the regulators that these are anarchic laws and this is not required. And sometimes, the people sitting over there, they also try to help you. The lawmakers, they understand our issues. And in this particular case now, because it's all over, and we did get a favorable order from the regulators itself. So what I'm trying to say is that sometimes when you bring out, sometimes we think that why should we even talk about these things? These are regulations, these have to be complied with. But that's not always true. We have to bring up the issues which we are facing as GCs from the business perspective, because it's unnecessary money that's going out for something which is not required to be complied with as a result of the technological advancement. These are kind of classical issues that we face day in, day out. The second kind of issue that we face is more related to the customer expectation that the customers have, because we are one of the largest players in terms of the multiplex industry. So there was an issue wherein the customers complained that why outside food should not be brought in, because the popcorns are very expensive.
Exactly, my point also, yeah.
Yeah, so people don't mind paying 5,000 rupees or 3,000 rupees for whatever in a hotel, but they mind paying for popcorns. So this was a very big matter for us because that's our business. So therefore, we had to really put our mind into it, and we had to tell the customer that this is just not the money for the product you are having, it is for the other services which are related to the product. This matter became so crucial that it reached Supreme Court also. And the Supreme Court also, the court was kind enough to acknowledge that this is our business, we can decide whether outside food should be brought in or not brought in. We know how to run our business well. This discretion should rest with us. So, these kind of issues keep on creeping up. And we cannot be insensitive to the thoughts and to the requirements of the customer. So these issues have to be handled with care. So these kind of issues we face, which are just not regulatory in nature.
Can I just on a lighter note, Maushami, I know your business knows how to run the business well, but just a suggestion, jack up the price by 200 rupees, give a 50-gram popcorn, people will be happy.
Absolutely.
I'll take your suggestion to the management, don't worry.
So we have around 7 minutes, and I have to fit in 3 questions. Starting with you, Baminee. Companies that are, have global operations, they have to manage compliance, a very complex compliance with regulations in multiple jurisdictions, How do you manage that?
Yeah, it's especially when I look at my current organization, we have presence in about 25 countries and about 68 subsidiaries to manage. So multi-jurisdiction, but the norm is to comply with the law of the land. So one is, of course, to focus on the fundamentals, ensure that the fundamental requirements of that particular jurisdiction is met. The other challenge that we've seen is what is right for one jurisdiction may not be right for the other. So how do we tackle that as a company, right? So we do have policies and processes set up which will sort of address it. So if there is no regulation in one particular jurisdiction, but there's something else in another place, then we have a policy which adheres to, say, the maximum or the stringent regulation that's there in place and expect this to be complied with, of course, subject to the normal processes that get set up. That's number 2. Number 3, I would say, is, of course, having a good governance structure set up, because I think that's very critical. You're somewhere sitting, somewhere you have people sitting across the globe. So ensuring that the people on the ground knows what they need to do. The business owners own it. The finance head or the legal heads of the respective jurisdictions own it. Have a certification process, a compliance mechanisms, and ensure that this gets placed before the board and there is a sign-off. I think this is one way that we are managing as of now.
Right. Sabi, let me ask you a very tech-related question, In your view, what role does tech play in managing regulatory compliance? And as we were discussing, what emerging technologies do you see as most beneficial in this regard? And what about the implementation part? You have regulations, then is it easy to implement them also? I mean,
Oh, okay, so absolutely. See, I think tech is important because at the end of the day, regulations are required to be, complied with, and your compliances you have to do. And like, Baminee just mentioned, if you're sitting in multi jurisdictions, I mean, to actually physically or manually do all of that is going to be a nightmare. So I think, that's where tech, and today, I mean, I have to give it to the startup world that, the kind of the tech solutions that have come out, I think some of them are fantastic. So clearly in today's world, we must utilize the tech available to turn around and comply. Just on this beats, I would say, kind of, for example, in the past, what we've done is we've used tech, of course. We've taken, those tools which are actually country specific, which help us to comply within those countries. But at the same time, we've also got a central piece where you put what is, say, at the corporate level, I need this done at our level and from all the countries or all the, kind of other entities. And then there are the local pieces which you must do, which you can certify and tell us, okay, this has been done. So you can put those tools together, which turn around and actually, kind of talk to each other. And I think it's important because, and clearly, especially with kind of things like Google Docs, etc., a lot of things can be just put in one place rather than sending emails, making changes. I mean, you can just see everything together. People can, multiple people can work on it. So I think that's one. So there are several of these tools available, and clearly tech is the way forward. What tech, and I think how things are evolving. I mean, today the world is all moving on AI. And I think if you look at AI, while there is still a divided house on that, saying whether AI is going to be the thing in or there is something else that's going to happen. And I mean, with the way the technology is evolving, you never know how things change. But today, I think AI shows a lot of promises. It has its own negative parts also, no doubt on that, but I think we should take the positive. And so I feel the whole AI system, AI-based technologies, AI-based tools which are going to turn around, generate and kind of predict models and then actually in a way self-comply should take away, I would say, a bulk of your day-to-day stuff. And then you'll be left with what is super critical and which needs human involvement, thereby giving you a lot more time to focus on the critical parts and let a lot of the standard stuff happen every day.
Right. Yogesh, I come to you and then I take views from other panelists. What are the best practices that companies can follow when dealing with regulatory compliance? And how can they avoid the common pitfalls?
Well, when you say best practices, I think, as Samir also rightly said, and same view have been coming all across. One very important is the mindset, and that's all across the company to begin with. Unless the company at large behaves in a very matured kind of a manner, and there's a very clear direction coming from the top itself that there's no option but to comply with the requirement. That's the foremost thing to happen. Now, we as lawyers, we as general counsels have a responsibility to ensure that we educate our stakeholders pretty well. There are so many new laws which keep on coming all the time. We have the, something coming up on the digital side from a competition law perspective, or something which is coming from a legal methodology, or from an ASCII perspective where the greenwashing regulations are coming up. Now, this is changing the way we possibly operate as a company. This is changing the way we advertise from a normal day-to-day kind of affairs. And unless our stakeholders understand the nuances, unless they are very well educated on a potential non-compliance, things will not change. Right. And there we need to step in to create an awareness on the requirements.
Right. Ajay?
Yeah, so on this part, I would add, like, for the purpose of effective compliance, there are 2-3 things that is very much important. One, you create awareness. Second, you involve the people. So like, for example, we got listed in 2021, and like the SEBI insider trading, the kind of the case law, the SEBI is levying the penalty for the insider trading. That was really we all were concerned about. But in our company, I'll tell you, the kind of the awareness that we create, hardly 1 or 2 cases were reported in the beginning. There is no issue on the insider trading. So what we are doing, whenever there is a big case law from the SEBI, we create the summary, we circulate within the organization. So the people are aware. And in the subject line, the SEBI levied this much lakhs of the penalty, okay? People read it when the mail is coming to them. And then, like, other than that, also on the ethical compliance, if there is any, like, for anti-bribery and corruption or anything, or money laundering, there is any case law from the Supreme Court. We are preparing the summary, we are circulating within the organization so that it creates the awareness among the team. And besides that, like, monthly, we communicate, we compile all what are the law applicable, what are the compliances, and then monthly we circulate within the organization. So that way we are controlling.
Right.
We also majorly do that. We do a compliance audit for all the verticals, and we prepare a compliance audit sheet which are peculiar to each function. For example, for IT, it would have different set of compliance ticks. For operation, it would have different set of compliance ticks. So for F&B, other verticals, every vertical would have a separate thing. And we do these periodically, like on a quarterly basis, we do these audits internally and through external parties. And whatever the report comes, we work on that, the respective departments work on that, and then they improve, or whatever has to be modified, they do that. So that's how we keep a check and balance. So that is the method we apply.
Thank you. I wish we had more time. We could have taken some questions, but thank you, Ajay, Sameer, Baminee, Yogesh, Maushami, for sharing your insights on this panel. Thank you so much.